much. Welcome back to the Dan Corder Show. South Africa is a movie.
Welcome to the watch party!
So this is one of my favorite people to interview, as much as it always seems to be for a terrible thing that has happened. Kasambala works with and for Women for Change, which is frankly one of the most important, largely online, but also now taken to the streets with petitions and marches. It's a women's organization seeking to fight against the scourges of sexism, femicide, and gender-based violence. And in the context of the awful news that we got last week about the tragic killing, the murder of Olorato Mongale, she's back. Please make some noise for Kasambala from Women for Change. Thank you so much for being here. As much as I said, we love having you, it's usually because something awful has happened. And what I was thinking about last night as I was preparing for this interview was the level to which emotionally your team's work must take a toll on your team. Like, I'm sure if y'all are not in therapy, you're planning to be in therapy. It must be objectively really hard that this is your job to like fight against this seemingly unending wave of horrific brutality against women.
Honestly, it's heartbreaking. I think, you know, a lot of tears shed last week and a lot of emotional moments, because I think we're really close with our survivors and with our victims and their families. And so we get to hear really step by step what they're going through, and we're the first people that they come to. They come to us before they think of going to the police. I mean, with Olorato's friends, they reached out to us first before the police to ask us to post about her being missing. Wow. And so we really are so personally connected to them, and so their stories, they stay with us. Sabrina's been doing this for years, and it still stays with her. So it is hard, but I mean, that's what makes us different from other organizations. We're here, we believe them, we listen to them, and we stay with them in this journey. But
yeah, and I mean, you guys do such phenomenal work, and that's the reason why people come to you first, is that you guys have, you know, now have this actually huge responsibility because of the phenomenal work that you've done. I just wanted to cite quickly, tell us about the headband I think that you're wearing and the significance of it.
So, I'm not sure people remember, but we did do our petition handover on the 11th of April, and our big message was unbury the truth. And whilst doing that, we had to come up with a list of different victims of femicide that we had posted about for our beautiful casket. And then we realized, actually, what if we make it more visible? What if we write all 1,000 of their names on this headband, so that when we wear it, we are representing these thousands of women that have been unfortunately taken by femicide.
Yeah, okay, so you would have heard earlier on in the show when I was talking about how I've basically done this exact show so many times over the years on radio and on TV. And so what I want to really focus on is why the government, the South African government, over many different years, GNU or ANC dominated or not, and why a succession of police forces, and both politically and police are overwhelmingly male dominated, which might be part of the problem. But why is there this ritualistic promise to do things to help women against this genuine pandemic of gender-based violence, and why do they constantly fail?
I think you mentioned it earlier when you mentioned that they love to market themselves, so we vote for them when they're making their rounds and we need to make, you know, votes. And it's exactly that. It's a front. It visually looks good to be against, you know, gender-based violence and say, no, we don't stand for that. I mean, we had the minister mention, you know, it's so good that she had a tracker, more women should do that. And what are we saying? So we get handed this death sentence and we need a tracker so you can find our dead body? Yeah. Like, really, what are we asking people to do? And so it's that kind of thinking. They mention these things. Oh, we've done an amendment for the Criminal Act. We said that police bail isn't allowed for any cases of GBV. Cool, so why are they getting bail then, and why are we letting them out? I mean, with Olorato's case, these men were out on bail from April after doing this to multiple women. And we've had these survivors reach out to us and tell us the horrific things they've experienced. So it really is such an empty promise, and it's very surface level. And I think we can see it in why it's implemented the way it is. Because you go to the police station, there's no training on this, there's no specialized process, there's no people who know exactly how to deal with GBV. You have the victim support, but what does that really mean? So your survivor's secondary victimization, and then you go to the politicians who, again, we had our protest 11th of April. We asked for them to declare this a national disaster. They sent us back a response. They didn't even mention that. Wow. They didn't say anything. Yeah. So we have barely heard back from them. And what we have is them basically reciting what they have already done.
Yeah. It's really crazy that it hasn't been declared a state of disaster, because anything else at this scale would have been. Also, something that I think a lot of people missed at the time, but the last State of the Nation address, when the president just slipped in that every police station is now a welcoming and safe space for victims of GBV, and the visceral response, and of course there were politicians in the room hoping to humiliate him, but like the kind of like, like, what are you talking about? So we know, and you've just mentioned a little bit about how police stations often feel like unsafe or unwelcoming places. Police officers are not trained. The horrible thing with gender-based violence, if you are lucky enough to not die from it, is that you need to go and then collect evidence for court cases and all this kind of stuff and investigations. We also know that police often take this, oh, it's a domestic issue, it's not my issue. But like from the work that Women for Change has done, and the policy document and the protest proposal and everything that you put forward, the petition, what do you guys think needs to happen now at like a political level, a Justice Department reform level, a courts level, to really start to fight this GBV crisis properly?
I think I really want to emphasize why we want to declare it a national disaster, and I'm going to compare it to COVID. When COVID came in, the way that the government mobilized all of their different services, the way policies and laws were implemented, and people were having to, people were drinking and smoking and going to jail for that. People breaking the curfew were going to prison for that. But when it comes to, 117 cases of rape being reported every day, what do they want from us? What is it they expect us to do? And so that national disaster is a big deal. It immediately allows for funding to come into fruition. It allows for more accountability to the police and to the justice system, so that we don't have cases like this where these people are walking out on bail and can do this again. So it really does start from the top, and there's only so much we can do on the ground. And I think the lack of support and the president not even mentioning that this is a crisis is very telling then of what the rest of the population is going to view it as. Because if your president doesn't acknowledge that this is a crisis, then as the police, why would you? No one's going to hold you accountable. So it starts from there. And that's why we keep calling them out, And when we had our petition, he was there in a building. They were there. They were at the union buildings. They didn't want to come out.
Right.
They didn't come speak to us. So again, what are you saying about this crisis?
Yeah. And what about like, okay, so we know men are trash, I guess. But like, what I also find wild is that the history of the African National Congress is that the ANC Womens League is powerful and important and carries weight. And does this kind of just mean that the Women's League has lost power in the African National Congress, or that the Women's League also doesn't really care? Because we know also that the Women's League has a long and storied history of victim blaming women and saying, well, if you just dressed differently, this wouldn't have happened to you. And so, yeah, I wonder what your thoughts would be on that.
Again, the Minister of Women, the way they speak about women and what's happening to them, again, very telling of what they believe, because a lot of these discussions and dialogue that happens with them in the discourse is very centered around, what can you do to fix it for yourself? How do you fix it? What can you do to protect yourself? And I actually wrote down quite a few cases of things that have happened to women. And I'm going to give you some of them just so that we can really look at what these politicians are saying. We've had women killed at KFC in the queue by their ex-partner. We've had a woman killed at a supermarket because she rejected a man. We've had a woman who has had a protection order who was killed in her car with her mother. You're in your house. Recently we spoke about a case where they were in their home and their house was burned down. People are sleeping and they're getting stabbed in their sleep. So where do you even begin to go? And I think that's the problem, is these sectors don't want to really acknowledge there is no safe place. There is nowhere you can go. And until they admit that and acknowledge that there's nothing we can do, they're going to keep acting like they're doing everything right. So on paper, everything looks great. They have the policies. They've amended these acts, so they're doing great. So now leave it. You guys must go figure it out.
Okay. And no care of whether or not there's implementation that's effective or not.
No.
And that's the other thing I wanted to ask, because in this horrific case from last week, the victim was killed, but she has surviving family, who are victims themselves. But in some cases, women who suffered terrible, terrible abuse survive. How good is the state at looking after victims and their families? Okay, I just saw your face. Fine. How well are the NGOs, organizations like yours doing at trying to help women in cases where the state is just not helping survivors?
I think, again, as an organization, we can only do so much. And I think the biggest thing is that we hold their hand through this process. We don't abandon them. We don't leave them to go to the police station and say, go figure it out. Or we don't refer them to, a pro bono lawyer and say, okay, go figure it out. We walk this journey with them. So they're never alone. They have us and they have our support. And so if nothing else is working, they can always come to us and we will always listen. And we do our best. We do try to connect them with a lot of lawyers, with counseling support. And I mean, I wish we could have more people voluntarily offer those services because we never have enough. But the biggest thing is we are with them and we won't leave them alone. And so even if they're coming and saying, this is what happened at the police station, we're like, cool. This is what we're going to do. This is the process we're going to need to follow. This is how we can help you and we'll be with you when you do this.
Right. And that ties into my final thing, which is like what do you guys need? Do you need pro bono lawyers? Do you need pro bono doctors and medics and people to be around and available, counselors? Do you need funding? Like what does Women for Change and also the other NGOs and organizations that exist in your space, what do you guys need to be able to do more while the state is failing?
So yes to all of the above, I think. No, but it is really that. I think the lawyers are some of the biggest ones and the counseling, because it's all good and well to say, okay, this is who you need to go to, this is the process, but there's a person behind this. And I think that's what we always acknowledge. These are stats that we tell you, but there are people behind these stats. Yeah. So we need those counselors who are voluntarily working. We need those lawyers who can guide them through this process. And I think even just knowing where to send them, not saying, okay, just go to SADC and let's hope they help you. Knowing who we're sending them to and being able to follow up with them. And then of course, funding is always a big thing. I think it's a common struggle for NGOs because we really rely on ourselves and we can only do so much. And Sabrina, the goodness she personally is always investing in this organization. She does a lot of her own, personal investment. And I mean, that's not sustainable for one person. So it's amazing if we could get these fundraisers, if we could get more funding and even partnerships, finding people who want to connect with us to help amplify our voices and support the stories that we're sharing.
For sure. Well, it's such a terrible tragedy again. Yeah. In some ways, it's so sad that I've invited you back, even though I'm thrilled that you were here, but she was phenomenal. Thank you to Women for Change and Cameron Kasambala for being here. We so appreciate it. Thank you for the work that you do.